Right, so this one is your first 12-mark question of the assessment. It was a question on asking you to assess the strengths and weaknesses of emerging powers in challenging for superpower status. So remember the assess question. I've got a whole video on command words. You have to give both sides, but you're only assessing, you're not giving an opinion, so you don't have to have a conclusion. Okay, but in an assess question, you have to assess the strengths and the weaknesses. The key thing here is of emerging powers. So you can't talk to me about the USA. You can't talk to me about the British Empire. British Empire is history. The USA is it's not an emerging power. Okay, it's there. It's the hegemonic power. So emerging powers. I'm thinking your BRICS countries. That was termed by Goldman Sachs. Your Mint countries, etc. Okay, so your NEEs in essence. So first paragraph you could talk about would be you could have a paragraph where you talk about economic strengths on the one side and the weaknesses on the other side. So you're assessing the strengths and weaknesses of emerging powers, but the economic one specifically. Okay, and that's a way of developing your answers by focusing on different kind of aspects of sustainability. So what does that look like? Well, your point could be that emerging powers like China and India have notable strength that position them as contenders for superpower status. Okay, so you give an example. You mentioned two, and you say that they've got. You just make a point basically. What's your evidence? Well, the evidence is in China, they've got the second largest GDP in the world, estimated around $17 trillion in 2021, average annual growth of about 67% over the last decade. Okay, that number is going to make a few of you laugh. Analysis. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that the economic strength allows China to invest heavily in infrastructure and technology, enhancing its global influence. The best example of that is Belt and Road Initiative, as it aims to expand China's economic reach through infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and Europe. It's a way for China to basically bankroll the world, use its use its resources, continue its economic model of produce, 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 produce. Okay. However, well, emerging powers also do have significant challenges. India, for example, despite its rapid economic growth, really struggles with high level of poverty and inequality. That in itself could undermine its massive potential because it reduces the amount of middle class. It can create resentment towards the ruling class and politicians. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that sustainability of the economic growth in these countries is questionable. How long can it last? For example, China's heavy reliance on coal raises concerns about environmental sustainability, long-term economic stability, which in turn will undermine its political model. So there you talk about the strength of China. You say, however, in India, here's a problem. In China, here's a problem. And you look at how there's both pros and cons to the rise of China and India from an economic point of view. Okay. Paragraph two, you could then look at military weaknesses and political strength. Again, you look at strength and weaknesses. You focus on different aspects, political aspects, but you're looking at military and politics. So, for example, emerging powers will exhibit political and military weaknesses that limit the ability to challenge established superpowers like the USA. So there you focus on the negative. So, for example, Russia faced international isolation due to sanction imposed after its annexation of Crimea in 2014 and further invasion of Ukraine in 2022, which in itself will weaken its political influence. How? Well, it hampers Russia's ability to engage in international diplomacy, which is crucial for superpower status. It was famously expelled from the G8. They became the G7, so it lost significant political clout within numerous international organizations due to political sanctions that were imposed on the Kremlin. What that means is that Russia's soft power has significantly weakened on an international stage. If you think back of the days of 2014, 2016, 2018, they were hosting Olympics, they were hosting football World Cups. Russia's soft power was at an all-time high, and then they invaded Ukraine, and then boom, the soft power disappears. It's not that simple though. You could also say, well, however, some emerging powers like India have made massive strides in political influence through participation in G20, the BRICS. You could also mention South Africa there. So you could say, well, what that means is it involves international organizations allowing emerging powers to challenge the Western dominance of the Bretton Woods system established after the Second World War. After the Second World War, a system was set up basically with a model based in the USA, where European Western powers dominated the established world order. Now you get the G20, the BRICS Plus. All these organizations show that you've got emerging powers that are suddenly pushing on the edges within the normal international global organizations and basically threatening the established system and forcing it to move towards a more multilateral world. This is just a plan, okay? But something along those lines would be a phenomenal way to write a 12